Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Joined by my good friend Mark Ostrander, and who I thought for most of the tournament was going to be the 2023 Fantasy Wrestling National Champion, only to get ousted by a pin in the finals. Grant Turner. We weren't talking about real wrestling, but we're big fantasy wrestling players. And Mark and I have traditionally done very well in this contest, and the student became the master this year, Mark. GT was running and gunning. Was at the top the whole way. We never caught him. And ended up losing by 1 point in the finals. And the difference, there's obviously a million things when you get to 140-ish points, but the difference was the Carter Starachi fall. He lost by 1. I want to set the table on this and then turn it over to him. Had Starachi majored, it would have been a tie, and Grant had the tiebreaker. The floor is yours, sir.
I want to thank my sponsors, the Weighing In podcast.
You probably learned a little bit from us this year. We'll take a little credit. We'll take a little credit.
Yeah. I mean, also just that's a lot of fun if you get a chance to like be a part of that contest and or like, you know, basically just gives you more incentive to kind of follow things, you know, whatever. And once again, like then it's like fantasy football. It's like fantasy cheering. It's like, well, I want Starachi to win, but I want him to win by like a little bit because going into Monday Night Football, like I'm up by 7.
Yes.
Right. That kind of thing. So it was a lot of fun and yeah, all sorts of amazing stuff.
Yeah. Your team was Pat Glory, Dayton Fix, Bo Bartlett, Shane Van Ness, Bryce Andonian, Keegan O'Toole, Mickey O'Malley, Parker Keckheisen, Younger Bastida, Wyatt Hendrickson. Dayton, I think, is the only guy that didn't wrestle up to his rank. This is a ranking, not a seed contest. Yeah. For example, Parker Keckheisen costs number 2 money, not number 1 money, to give people an understanding of that. And your big gainers were Shane Van Ness. Wyatt Hendrickson, I think, scored the 2nd or 3rd most points in the whole tournament with all the falls he had and everything else.
Right.
So the winning team, Spencer Lee, Jesse Mendez, Parker Phileas, Shane Van Ness, Josh Humphrey, Tanner Cook, Carter Starachi, Aaron Brooks, Max Dean, Wyatt Hendrickson. So congratulations to F. Whitney, who scored 141.5. Mark, 1 year, I can't remember which team was entered under your name or my name, but I remember twice we won it. 1 year we needed Drew Foster to beat Max Dean, and that happened. And then 1 year we needed Bo Nickel to not bonus Colin Moore, and that happened. So sometimes it usually comes down to the finals. Sometimes I know 1 year I wanted, I needed David Taylor to not major Tyler Caldwell. But it makes it a lot more interesting to watch, right?
Yep. Congrats, Grant.
Thanks, brother.
See, hanging out with smart people does help sometimes.
You know what? It is the company you keep, right? So like,
Mark, there's a lesson to be learned here. Of the 3 of us, only one of us didn't have an aneurysm about the rankings all year, and that guy was the runner-up. So maybe a little more emotional detachment would serve us well.
Also, just because like of how the rankings versus the seeds, like, I mean, that plays in it. Like, because I think Shane Van Ness was like a 13 ranked wrestler, and I'm like, please. Right. That guy's way better than that, right? So it's like a plus 10.
Yes. Yeah. And we're going to get into we're going to go through the brackets, and if we get through all 10 today, we do. If we don't, we don't. But there was a guy for specifically GT when we were doing the live draft, the auction contest, that you were real high on, and I was teasing you about, and you were absolutely right at 141. And I thought he was good. I just didn't think he was going to be as good as he did, you know. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So all right, let's first of all, and Mark, I told you this wrong. Vito Arujau got the the outstanding wrestler, which
as he should have.
I texted you that. So for people that don't know, I do interviews at the NCAA tournament. This is the first year that I did them. I literally think I had pneumonia Friday night. Gary Abbott, who I know will watch this because he's the one that edits this if we say anything wrong, was kind enough to let me just make sure that he didn't miss anything as he was doing his write-ups. I went back to the hotel Friday night and did not leave till Sunday. So, and still getting over it, still a little coffee, but literally had like the pains and the shivers. The one interview I did on Friday night before it all went to hell on me physically was Matt Ramos, which we'll get to in a minute. But when Saturday night I was texting Mark, and after 133, I said, that's your O-dub. I mean, you can't run through the field he did. And the O-dub's an interesting conversation, guys, because you can argue it's a season-long award, a career-long award, or a tournament-long award. I was saying based on tournament, it has to be Vito. I think if you say career, it has to be Yanni. And if you go season, it's got to be probably – I mean, that's really sort of the Hodge Award, right? Like that's the criteria for the Hodge. So, Mark, I'll start with you. Who's your O-dub and who's your Hodge?
O-dub was Vito, obviously, of the national tournament. I think he had as good as you can get. I wasn't shocked, but I was pleasantly surprised how well he wrestled because he had some up and downs during the year. Hodge, I'm going to give to Mason Paris from Michigan at heavyweight. He was unbelievable, and he may not have had the most bonus points this year of all the people that are up for it, but he had 10 wins of the All-Americans at heavyweight. He won 10 times against those guys, which is a ridiculous number, having to meet that many All-Americans in 1 year. And I think he had 33 wins, David. 33-0 was his record. So he was out there. He put himself out there all year long. I think he deserves it. And you can argue Srirachi. You can argue Srirachi had a great year also, and I agree. He did. But I think when you wrestle 33 matches and 10 of them are against All-Americans and you beat every one of them, and some of them numerous times, you deserve to be the Hodge winner.
Let me say this, and then I'll turn it over to you to Grant. I don't think anybody's arguing any of these guys didn't have great seasons to use. And I know Mark isn't either. These guys all were better wrestlers than we were, or are better wrestlers than we were. It's trying to determine the greatest. It's like picking the Heisman Trophy winner. Like a bunch of guys had great seasons. So with that said, go ahead, GT.
Well, I think the way that I would view the O-dub is a tournament O-dub. Like, so that I just want to preface that. And I think, yes, I think Vito deservedly should get the O-dub for the tournament. Just with, I mean, he was on fire. He was on another level. And both of those guys, RBY, Dayton Fix, basically his semis and finals matches are, one world silver medalists and, multiple time national finalists and national champions. I just think that he looked on another level for that tournament against some of the very best in the country, pound for pound. So, I mean, once again, I think that would be my pick. Once again, we're splitting hairs because all these guys are legit, right? Yeah. So as far as the Hodge is concerned, for me, it's hard not to give it to the 5th ever 4-time national champion for Yanni. If I do it as a career, I mean, I think, he wrestled really closely contested matches at the tournament. It wasn't necessarily a very pretty national title run for Yanni. He wasn't as dominant as probably Paris or some of those other guys. But if I'm giving out, and once again, I don't know the specifics to the Hodge Trophy, if it's like dominance and all that kind of other things like, matches and pins and all that kind of stuff, that all goes into a contributing factor for picking. But I tip my cap to the guy that's won 4 national titles. So,
yeah. So the criteria for the Hodge is record, dominance / bonus point percentage, quality of competition, and sportsmanship. And I think we can safely eliminate sportsmanship Not that it's not important. I think everybody was a good sport this year that is up for it. So, first of all, I think the Hodge makes it a lot easier to vote the OW for who had the best tournament. Like it used to be when they didn't have the Hodge, you're like, okay, well now, you know, like, hey, Grant went 45-0, but he had a couple 3-2 matches. Mark had 3 majors, but was 27-5. You know, but Mark had the best tournament. Grant had the best season. What do we do? Now there's separate awards. So I think that works out that way. I saw some metrics. Andy Hamilton put some stuff up. And also this would never have happened when we were at track wrestling. So I want to thank Christian Piles from Flow. There was a very frustrating session on Friday morning where we're trying to get interviews, and a lot of the guys were running off in one direction and not the other. And then when they ran off towards our direction, there's 2 different sides. And CP was great about being willing to trade interviews. Like if he got Grant and I got Mark, he was willing to trade. And that's the first time I think we've ever done that with Flow. So I want to thank him. But I saw his post, and he went through his criteria, and I saw Andy Hamilton in his post, and I saw Jason Bryant. These are 3 guys that, you know, sort of did it mathematically. And when you base it on the criteria, I think Paris has the lead. It is going to be weird. I don't think Yanni will get it. And I think they changed the criteria this year to all 10 finalists, all 10 champions because of Yanni. So you could vote for him because they've never done that before for guys that weren't undefeated. So, and I think Yanni would be looked at differently if he hadn't lost that match, but he did. You know, that was the whole Pinheiro should be number 1 back in November conversation. So, but I don't think, I think Yanni will go down. I mean, when you're one of the 5 best to ever do it, I mean, Logan Stieber kind of doesn't get enough shine for what he did. But when you go 4 for 4, I don't care how you did it, red shirt, no red shirt, COVID, no COVID, same weight, different weight. We all grew up wanting to be a national champion or an Olympic champion. And be a national champion once is extremely, extremely difficult. You're talking about 1%ers. And then you go up the food chain, the 2 and 3 timers and 4 timers. It's an ultra select group when you think about the number of people who have stepped on a mat in Division I, and then take all the guys that never wrestled Division I and would have liked to. So I think Yanni is sort of the accomplishment of the year. I think Paris is probably going to win the Hodge, and I think Vito had an unbelievable tournament. And we're going to get into what we had right and wrong. To be fair, you guys are going to have to take our words on this because last week was so busy between Grant, Mark, and I, we didn't get to do our picks. I'll be very blunt about what I was wrong about, and I'm sure these guys will too. But so we didn't get to put our picks on wax, but I think that's where we go. Before we get into starting at 25, I will say this. I was sitting with Earl Smith from Intermat, who we love, who came on the show in July, and we're going to go back and review our July picks too. I said, how much could you have bet that Fairleigh Dickinson in basketball would have beat the number 1 seed, and Spencer Lee would have been the only number 1 seed to not make the finals? That parlay, you know, $20 would have probably bought libations for all your friends for the whole weekend. I mean, Spencer was considered a mortal lock. We just started 25. I'll go first on this. Regardless of what you think about what happened wherever else, I understand ESPN has a job to do, but I don't think showing his mom breaking her glasses in the semis is necessary. I mean, I guess somebody has to shoot that, but whether you decide to put that on the air is difficult. I think the people that call Spencer a quitter because he didn't come back probably have never done anything as hard in their life to get through the tournaments he has. Clearly, that's a young man who's probably hasn't had 100% health since his junior year in high school, I would argue. I mean, he lost to DeSanto as a senior with a bum wheel. And, you know, Mark and I made the argument in the fall that we thought he should redshirt, make a full run at it in 23, 24, right into the Olympics. I'm sad to say I think we were right. And I have no joy in that. But Spencer Lee's an iconic wrestler. I mean, he's a guy that Iowa is at an elite level as a program. And he's a guy that, you know, was made Iowa wrestling, must-see wrestling. He's the leader of that group. He's staying in Iowa City. So this is a weight in general where I got a lot wrong. I did not pick I did not pick Mac Ramos to make the finals. I thought Glory would make the finals but would lose to Lee. I certainly didn't think Anthony Noto would medal. I didn't think Eddie Ventresca would medal. I thought Patrick McKee would medal. So there wasn't a lot of my picks that I had right about this. Big shout to Brandon Courtney for placing third as a senior. Liam Cronin All-Americaning, Anthony Noto All-Americaning, but this was a weight that had a lot of surprises to me. So Grant, you can go first here at 125. What'd you get right or wrong? What were your thoughts?
Well, I don't remember exactly who I picked back in July.
I can tell you. I can tell you if you'd like to know. Let's do that. July, Mark picked Vito as the champ, which I'm going to count that as right. Okay? I think we count that as right. You, me, and Earl picked Spencer Lee, so we were technically wrong. Mark crushed this weight. He had Matt Ramos as his non-top 8 All-American, as did Earl. GT, you had Teskey, and I had Certain. So we swung and whiffed. Earl got it half right, and Mark, I don't even think that's a loophole. I think when the guy moves up a weight and wins it, we got to give him the dub. So
right. Well, I think at 125, historic performance for Pat Glory. I believe that's the first Turnston national champion in, 76 years?
It was like 1950 something, yeah.
Yeah. So huge shout out to the Princeton Tigers and Coach Ayers and what they're doing. I mean, he called his shot. I believe he like snapshotted a thing on Twitter. And he's like, this year, Princeton will have a national champion.
Last March.
Yep.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, this weight class was crazy. Matt Ramos shelled out. Once again, you saw it in the duel against Spencer. You know, he's a tough wrestler, and it was able to throw the kitchen sink at him both times that they wrestled. So, amazing performance by Pat Glory to win that weight class.
Marco?
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw Grant right after the semis. Spencer got pinned, and I saw him. I went up there, and I was like in a daze. Felt like I just got punched in the stomach. You know what I mean? It's kind of the reason I wanted to go to this national so bad as to why.
Marco, I think you're Wi-Fi, so we'll come back to you in a second.
Yep.
So GT, I think what Mark was saying was like, hey, he wanted to go watch 4. I will say this for people that couldn't be in the arena, the air got sucked out of there. Like, it was very weird because you go straight from Spencer losing to RBY losing. Okay. And, you know, like, or not RBY losing. I'm sorry, Fix losing.
Fix losing, yeah.
Mark, we got you back. Go ahead.
Okay. But anyway, it just felt like I got punched in the stomach. Spencer has been such a positive for wrestling in college, the way he conducts himself. I mean, he's just a great teammate. He's a great individual. I've seen him at golf outings. He goes around, gets his pictures taken. He's a very confident young man, which you have to be able to do the things you do. But I'm going to be honest, David, I was sitting 5 rows up in the Northwestern section for that, and I watched him get ready for that match, and he was sitting in the chair. When he got up, the one leg that had the brace on it, he wasn't really moving it. And I thought maybe he had hurt it the match before. I don't know if he did. This is just kind of what I said. And I was sitting with my brothers, and I said, this may not be good, because he didn't make a shot. All he was doing was reaching for a leg, and he wrestled different in that match. He chose top. Have you ever seen? I've never seen Spencer choose top. He was something wasn't right, and I don't know what it was. But I mean, when you're up by 3, David, with riding time, to get in the position that he got in, it wasn't normal. So I mean, yeah, it is what it is. You know, you got to give Ramos all the credit in the world. And I knew Ramos was an outstanding wrestler. I picked him to be an All-American. I saw what he did the year before at 33, pinning a highly ranked kid in the tournament early on. So, you know, give the guys credit that do it. It's tough to win 4. I think that you kind of saw that. There was another quote that I had read or heard about Yanni, and I'm just going to say this real quick. He had 20 matches at Nationals over the 4-year span that he won it. His bonus point during those 20 matches, David, is less than the heavyweight from Air Force this year alone. So that's how competitive it is to be a 4-time national champ. He had very few bonus points at all.
15 of his opponents were All-Americans. So that has a lot to do with it, too.
Yep. So, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah. So I got to interview Ramos on Friday night. And, no, Friday morning, after he won the quarters. Okay? And he said, he goes, Spencer Lee was one of my heroes growing up. He goes, and he was I heard more wrestlers this weekend say that guy's a great competitor. They don't call him a great wrestler. It's really, it's a very interesting, the jargon's very interesting. And I said to him, I go, how much does it help you to have gotten a feel? That everybody I've ever talked to that wrestled Spencer Lee said, you got to feel it one time. And he goes, it helps. It really helped. He goes, I know what to expect now. And he was one of the first guys that I talked about that used this saying, I know what my why is. And Grant, you're a coach. I know Nick Mitchell's got to be preaching that to people. What's your why? You're not doing anything without your why. What's your goal? What's your focus? What's your reason for doing what you're doing? So I think I texted you, GT, before the semis. I'm like, I think this dude's got a chance, just because like the way his body language walking out of that was not like, I'm happy to be in the semis. I'm happy to be an All-American. I'm happy to not be on Minnesota's bench. Like, he was like, I'm going to do some stuff. And the one thing you have to say about Ramos, first of all, he did not have a dominant tournament. I mean, like, he almost lost to Tremblay. He almost lost in the round of, he almost lost a couple of times to Cardinal. He just lets it go, man. When it counts, he lets it go. I know in my wrestling career, there was times I needed to cut it loose and I couldn't. It was a mental block, in high school, but I was just so much better. But in college and big matches, I didn't always cut it loose, and it's one of the things I regret. This dude, win or lose, like, he went for some stuff against Pat Glory. He lost, but he didn't – I don't want to use any shooting reference, but he didn't leave anything on the bench. He didn't leave anything in the barrel. He just went. And he's a very likable kid. And when you're up close to him, he looks like he's 14 years old in his face. Like, he's like the babyface assassin. So, I think, Mark, I think you're right. I don't think Spencer was 100%. It wasn't 100% going into the tournament. I think it was even less than that going into the semi. But listen, we got to give Ramos credit, and then we got to give Pat Glory credit, because Pat Glory could have been like, okay, well, I don't have to wrestle Spencer. This is going to be a walk, and now went out there prepared and got pinched himself or something. So unbelievable way to 125 at the tournament. That weight class we'll be talking about for years. Go to 133. We talked about this in the OW stuff. I think, Mark, you can go first here. What'd you get right or wrong? Let me go back to what we picked. I picked RBY. Mark picked RBY. Earl picked RBY. GT picked Fix. So we were all wrong. I picked Kai Arini as a non-top eighter. Mark Schriever, GT Hernandez, Earl Latona. So I win 33. So might be the only time I say that. So I'm gonna say it. Mark, what are your thoughts? 33. What going in? What'd you get right or wrong?
Well, I had Vito at 25. I thought he'd drop down, so I got that wrong. But I didn't think Spencer would wrestle this year, so that's kind of why I picked Vito. So I can't take the credit that I thought Vito would beat Spencer. But 33, Vito had the tournament of the century. He majored the two best kids at the weight. I mean, he dominated that weight. And I've never seen that happen in a national tournament as long as I've been going. I've been going for a long time. That one individual dominated two of the best wrestlers, not just in the United States, but two of the best in the world, as easily as it made it look. And I know it wasn't easy, but he made it look easy. I've never seen anybody run RBY down and score when he wanted to score, because RBY is so hard to score on. So kudos to him. May have been, to me, the best weight at the national tournament. Just watching the wrestling, the way Vito was able to navigate those two guys, it was just – he was a master at it, and it was so much fun to watch. It really was.
Yeah. GT?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this weight class was loaded with a ton of talent as, people like moved around. And once again, Vito was potentially at 25. Now he's up. Like RBY, Fix, McGee is a beast too. Just want to make sure that we throw his name into the mix. This, he's been a monster at this weight class. And, getting third in the country at this weight, is a massive undertaking. I'm a big Dayton Fix guy. Thought he could definitely pull it off. Once again, this is, just a couple of close matches, right? So Vito kind of picked him apart a little bit, got him, majored him. And then he goes into a match with McGee for third and fourth, loses a tight match. But that's how you can get, fifth or sixth in the nation and only have like two really close, tough matches and be there, right? So you maybe lose in the semis in a close match, and then you come to the backside and you got a match like McGee before you even get to the third and fourth place match, and you lose, right? So, I think I would probably say even at 125 and 133, the professionalism of the guys that ended up losing, like I thought that was a very big, I would say a theme between all the athletes is like nobody really like lost their minds, and like basically, even in their interviews, they were like, hey, tough matches. These guys are great, good wrestlers, good competitors, whatever the terminology that those guys would have been using would have been. But I also think that, these are guys that are like little kids look up to because they've been at the top for so long, right? RBY, Fix, they've had, RBY had a flow film, Dayton has been on the world scene, has that international prowess that USA Wrestling can basically get behind, right? So world silver medalist, Vito making age group categories and, dominating. So it's really cool to see, but yeah, what a tournament at 33, big time pillars of that weight class for a long time ended up losing, both of them to the same guy. So very cool to see for Vito. Great job.
Couple things to point out here. First of all, Mikhail McGee wrestled Vito to overtime in their duel. So it's not just like, well, he matched up good against RBY. And the RBY McGee semi is one of the best matches I've ever seen. One thing Mark was right about was Jesse Mendez placing. He lost in the second round and won 1, 2, 3, 4 matches. I think most of us were pretty high on Nagao after watching him. He came through and took 5th, beat Mendez for 5th. Cody Fippen, he packed Cannon and he packed Ragusin. I know his dad, he's an Air Force guy, so shout out to him. And sort of heartbreak for Mickey Philippi, probably one of the best guys I've ever seen, not All-American, and he was in the back. After I saw him after he lost, and his body was shaking, he was crying. And somebody said, "Are you okay?" He goes, "I'm okay. I'm just hurting." And I had to walk away because, like, I think we've all been there at one point in our lives, either as athletes or as coaches, or most likely both. I remember talking to Gavin about him in January, prep for a duel, and what a great leader he was for their program and how much he'll be missed. So, this sport is not kind, and I remember one year my brother didn't win state, and my mom was like, why does God let this happen? And I'm like, sometimes the other guy's a good person too, or they're not a good person. They were just better at wrestling that day. And, so this was a way, again, that didn't go very chalky. But my God, if you go back, like I recorded all this stuff. I went back and watched the semis on ESPN, and that McHale McGee RBY match. And I don't want to dumb it down and say it was just athletic. The level of technique that was going on there's crazy good. So, all right, 41. Alirez makes history for Northern Colorado. Woods makes the finals. GT, I think it's your turn to go first here. And let me, real quick, we picked at the beginning of the year. I picked Carter. Wait a minute, champ. I picked Cole Matthews. Mark picked Woods. Grant picked Woods. Earl picked Woods. So we were all wrong, but I was way more wrong. I picked Cole Matthews my Carter Young as my non-top 8 All-American. So did Grant. To be fair, he was hurt, but we were wrong. Mark picked Bartlett. He was right. Earl picked Alvarez, who didn't wrestle. So I think Mark wins 141. GT, floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, some huge because I had read Earl's article of kind of the takeaways from the NCAA tournament. Basically, Iowa keeps its streak alive of having a national finalist every year since 1990. So
that's insane.
Unreal stat right there, right? So, but I mean, I think the other big thing for the sport of wrestling is like the parity. And once again, I shouldn't say that just because of Alirez winning the national title, but it is a kind of mid-major. They're a part of the Big 12, but they're not really a part of the Big 12 as far as a power conference is concerned. And then also like Colorado native, staying in Colorado, doing what he wants to do for, basically his state, and then also representing his state while going to school there. Yeah, what a tournament for him, and what a historic run for his program. I can't remember the stat right off the top of my head, but it was like either like 64-year gap between their national champions or their program coming back and having somebody in the finals, something along those lines. I apologize for not having that ready, but just a really good wrestling collegiate sports story there.
Yeah. Marco, you can talk about Iowa and their Greco-Roman prowess at this point, or are you going to wait?
No, I'm going to give up on the Greco-Roman thing. I don't know what happened. I just –
Mark lost it Sunday on the drive home.
I did. I didn't know Iowa was a Greco team. I'd never seen so much upper body moves. Right on the edge of the mat and getting tossed for 6 is just, I guess it's just unthinkable to me, because you're in a position to win a national title. If you drop down and just run them off the mat or try to score something, get in a position where you can only win the position, you can't lose. Because if he rides him out, and he was riding him out, he's up 2-0 with riding time. And obviously Alirez could not ride him because he got out right away after an 8-minute debacle of trying to figure out what was going on, which I thought needs to be changed. You can't take 8 minutes to figure out a freaking point. That's just ridiculous. NCAA has to do something about that. And they were even laughing about it out on the mat, like, let's wrestle. You can see them talking to each other, and they both started laughing like, this is ridiculous. So I don't know. It's just, it's one of those things that happens. It's tough to win a national championship. It is. I don't care if you're the best guy. Sometimes you have to think what's best for me right now. And Might have been running the guy out of bounds instead of trying to lift him up and getting back points. But these kids are confident in what they do. So give them credit. Alir's wrestle, he does what he has to do. He said in the interview, it's the only thing I could do is what I did, and it ended up working out. So, good for him.
Yeah. I mean, so from my point of view, I do understand what you're saying about, like, in jiu-jitsu, we talk all the time about, like, we don't want to be in 50-50. We'd rather be like in 20-0, or maybe I don't score, but there's no way you're going to score kind of situation. I think that applies to wrestling too. It's also hard to take away a guy's aggression. Like, I remember one year Daniel Dennis lost to Jordan Oliver in a duel with like 4 seconds left because he touched his head and got shrugged, like right at the end, and it pretty much dominated the match. But that's how he dominated the match, just by banging on his head for 6 minutes and 55 seconds. So it's an interesting dichotomy there. I think a couple of interesting things at this weight. Bartlett makes a run from the 6th seed to take 3rd. Clay Carlson, from the 11th seed to 5th. This is GT, Lachlan McNeil. Okay, so like you and me had this conversation. I'm full disclosure. I know how good he is. He was a huge recruit coming out of high school. I remember when Ramos got him, he was giving the other coaches trouble, like at Iron Man, how good he was going to be. But he wrestles like in the Canadian National Championships between the ACCs and the NCAAs. And I'm talking to you and Shane at the bar, and I'm like, dude, this guy can't turn it around that quick. And you're like, and you were at the Canada tournament. And I was teasing you. I'm like, you got recency bias. You were there, and it's all love. I mean, like, it's like, we had too good a friendship. But I was teasing you about it. But you saw something, and the kid wrestled phenomenally well. I mean, he wrestled from the 10 seed, made it to the quarters. So he beat Cornella and then lost a close match to Alirez. Then he beats Hines. Then he beats D'Amelio. Then he beats Brock Hardy. And then he loses to Bartlett. And on that fantasy team, that was a huge difference for you. And also North Carolina, they placed the highest they have since 1995. We'll get to their national champion at 157. So he was another story here at 141. Brock Hardy places, Phileas places, D'Amelio places. But this weight was fairly chalky. There's 2 undefeated guys. Beginning of the year, this weight was completely, no one knew what was going to happen. We talked throughout the year. It's one of the advantages of watching our podcast is guys separate themselves. They were clearly the 2 best guys. I agree with you, Mark. I think Real Woods' path to victory, if they wrestle 10 times, he probably wins more than 5 because he can ride, and his defense is really good. It also just shows, though, like Andrew Alirez is a guy who's probably going to take an Olympic redshirt year next year and try to make the team at 65 kgs, and he's got a very extensive freestyle background, which GT gets to see a ton in person, and I've been able to see more and more in person. That's not that crazy of a position that what he did in freestyle. It is in folk style. In freestyle, what Matt Ramos did at 125 is a fairly typical position in freestyle. It's actually super typical in Greco if you can stamp the guy underneath you. Like, that's a position you want to be in. So we're a USA Wrestling podcast, but self-serving, go wrestle freestyle and Greco-Roman because it helps you at the Division I level. Okay, 49. Yanni over Sasso, super chalky. Van Ness is probably the non-Yanni story of this tournament. Comes from the 12 seed, takes 3rd. Parko 4th. Caleb Henson, the true freshman, 5th. Max Murin finally gets his AA status. Got to be happy for him. Mahler 7th. Blockus 8th. And I think the other thing to look at in a lot of these weight classes is I think there was a portal All-American at every weight. It's like if you go back, we talked about 25 Ramos, 33 through no fault of his own, Mikhail McGee, because of the Old Dominion situation. 41, Real Woods, obviously, is a portal guy. 49, Parko, again, with Fresno State, is a portal guy. Michael Blockus is a portal guy from UNI to Minnesota. So huge impact on the team rankings. I'll go quick here first and get out of the way. I think probably the biggest surprise to me was how Paniro Johnson wrestled. I thought he'd be definitely in the hunt for the medals. And he barely beat Alec Hagan, who I know pretty well. He's a St. Louis kid, trained with us. Just seemed like maybe the tournament was a little big for him. No doubt he'll be back. He'll start lower in the rankings because of where he ended up. But it's a guy that'll climb quickly. Sad to see Gomez not there at 100%. He's another guy that says he's coming back. And we'll get to this next week, but there's a great article by Earl that broke out who's coming back at every weight, and then Flo did an article which is in our spreadsheet, which we'll go through, but I don't want to just act like I put it up there. It's from these sources of who's coming back at points at each weight and by team. And, I feel like if we don't get through everything this week, we will next week, and then GT, it'll be a couple weeks of U.S. Open preview because U.S. Open is going to be the best it's probably been in 10 years with the new format. It's going to be super freaking loaded. So, I think 41 or 49 rather. I mean, Murin's a guy that's perpetually been in that round of 12 and got it done this year against Lamer from Michigan. So he's the master of the close match. You guys are Iowa guys, so GT, I'll let you go first here.
Well, I think I think this season when we talked about 49 throughout the entire year, it was just completely top to bottom craziness all over the place. We had multiple guys that could have been the number one ranked guy in the nation at multiple times. I also want to make sure before we get to like some of maybe the specifics in the tournament or whatnot, Milner from App State,
yes,
not being able to compete at the national tournament, already a two-time All-American. I believe it was kind of a knee injury or something like that that kept him out of.
He had an infection, knee infection.
Yeah. But once again, that shifted a lot of these athletes and seeds to make this tournament a little bit more crazy than what it could have been. Because I believe Milner was either the 9 or 8 seed.
It was 8, 9, or 10. Yeah.
So, but you gotta make sure you kind of, because we collectively thought, he very well could have been the number one ranked guy after all of those upsets very early in the season, right? Same thing with Pinheiro Johnson.
Yeah.
But if you watched Pinheiro Johnson throughout the entire year, the guy was, a 3-2 overtime. Once again, those are the type of matches that, once again, keeping it close. He had a couple of close matches that didn't go his way. Had a couple of matches that his first round that ended up getting, he ended up pulling it out, but barely. There was like some controversy on whether or not he was taken down right away. But, at this weight class, I think for the portal was a great pull, a great observation with those guys, Blockus and Parco, and, even, with the Old Dominion connection with McGee and
Cardinal too.
It's crazy to think how the landscape of the team title and the team race, or even in the individual brackets, can be affected so much by either a gentleman getting hurt that had qualified and then somebody else gets an opportunity to come in, which Dom Demas was able to get into the bracket, a previous All-American. So this is the national tournament. This is why it's wild. But yeah, I mean, of course, that we're one of the greatest collective wrestling mind groups in the country. And of course, we saw a 12-13 quarterfinal, Van Ness and Brooks from Indiana. I mean, we all had that, right?
We all had Caleb. We all had Caleb winners too, yeah.
Right, absolutely. I mean, if you guys don't pay attention to the pod, this is why you got to come here all the time. It's because we would have forecasted this.
So speaking of what we forecasted, right or wrong, we all picked Yanni as champ. Mark and I had Yaya as our non-top 8, and Grant and Earl had Demas as our non-top 8. So I'm just going to call that a push. I think we're all pretty close to even there. So, Marco, go ahead.
Yeah, this weight kind of, Van Ness, and I don't know why I'm surprised, because Penn State does it year in and year out. They evaluate during the year, they work on things, and at the national tournament, they're ready to go. And Van Ness wrestled probably as good as anybody at the NCAAs, going from the 12. He ended up being the 12 seed and making run to third. So he
wrestled the best for portions of matches. If you watch his first round match, he was losing 8-1.
Correct.
Going into the third period. It was 8-3 because again, Piles and I go down there because we're like, there's a huge upset. And like Gary's like, hey, man, and you know, when you're on the opposite side, like if Grant's the #1 seed and I see a score that's 9-1, I assume he's winning. I'm not necessarily checking anklets, which is a mistake. But when you're trying to watch 16 guys wrestle at once, it's an assumption you make. So I go all the way down there. I miss nothing because there's a challenge. It was 8-1 or 8-3. And I know Alex Clemson very well. And I'm like, I yell at him. I go, what's the challenge? He goes, they're going to lose it. So he comes back and it's 8-1. And Miller has riding time. Okay. And this was a long rest. Van Ness kicks him. It's 9-1. And I might get some of this wrong. Takes him down 9-3. Kicks him 10-3. Takes him down. Hooks a Turk. Tries to get it. Can't get it. 10-5. Kicks him 11-5. Takes him down 11-7. Kicks him 12-7. Then pancakes him and pins him. But even if he hadn't pinned him, it would have been 13-12. Now, I don't know if he had rode him out, kept him on his back, if it would have been 13-13 with riding time or not. Ethan Miller is one of the tough – he's wrestled in Border Brawl. And, I mean, like, he's a really tough kid. He's as tough as he is good. And what I mean by that is, like, he'll get better skill-wise, but he already was a really tough kid mentally and physically. And they'll work with him on that because he just lost focus for about a minute and a half. I mean, it's not kind, unkind. It's just what happened. But, I mean, Van Ness was literally one period away from just being on the backside. But, again, what Penn State does is they do stuff like that, and then instead of it just being a moment in the sun, it catapults them forward and ends up doing that. By the way, one thing I was absolutely right about, there's plenty I was wrong about. Penn State's best 4 guys won national. We talked about this in January. Their best 4 guys were Starachi, Brooks, Kirk, and Haynes. They scored 84. Next best score was 82.5. I don't think this is a big shock, but it's way better to have a couple champs, couple finalists than it is to have 10 guys take 8th. Like the 10 guys that take 8th might win a dual meet tournament. If they ever change to that, that's what you're looking for. But right now, that's the move. So, Mark, any other thoughts on 149 before we jump to 57?
No, I was really is the gut shot that I took when Spencer got beat kind of went away a little bit when Max Murin won his round of 12 that night, the first round, which was when you watch a kid work so hard and he doesn't have all the tools that a lot of these kids have. He's just a hard nose, come at you for 7 minutes. You know, it's really good to see him become an All-American. So,
yeah. 57.
Daryl Johnson, let's be honest, David. He's got very little, you know, he doesn't have that much to change to be a top 3 kid in the country. He's right there. He's that talented. I think he's as close to being a top 3 kid as there is in anybody in the country at a weight that didn't be All-American, because he's beat a lot of these kids. So he's going to be good. He just has to go through the process. But it would not shock me if he wasn't top 2 or 3 next year.
Well, what's crazy at that weight is there's 6 returning All-Americans, 3 round of 12ers plus Gomez. So, like, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I mean, the depth of that weight is insane.
Yep.
So 57, and I know GT's close to this program because Carolina's a Nike program. Austin O'Connor, he wrestled in Border Brawl in 17. So, and I interviewed him at the press conference on Wednesday. Maybe one of the most slept on 2-time champs we've had in a while in terms of publicity, right? And he's sort of in this golden age of wrestling where there was the Spencer Lee story and then the RBY story. Sorachi can actually be a 5-time champion. Brooks can become a 4-time champion. Mason Paris is killing people. Wyatt Hendrickson is pinning people, and people are, saluting. I mean, there's all these amazing. Pat Glory and Alirez are changing history for their programs. I think I said this to Mark. Austin O'Connor just or maybe there's no GT. I was talking. I go Austin O'Connor just good at wrestling. He's good at and I'm he's just good at all the super fundamental stuff. And I'm not saying he can't do some crazy highlight stuff. He's really good at sprawling. He's really good at not letting you touch his legs. You said this, I'm going to steal your line. He picked down against Josh Humphreys. You said you looked away, and he was out in 5 seconds and didn't give it a second thought. He can ride. He knew if he was 0-0, he would beat Levi Haynes. He believed that. I mean, I don't know what he's going to do, if he's going to go fight MMA, if he's going to wrestle after this. I know he's been beat up throughout his career, if he's just going to go get a job and be a coach or whatever. But stud out of Chicago. And, just impressive, man. And, really happy for him to overcome those injuries. I interviewed him. He talked about how hard it was to place on one leg last year and to be at full strength. And I think people just didn't give him enough credit last year. Well, you wrestled. Maybe you're just not as good. Maybe your first one was a fluke, right? Because the match he won against Sasso was on kind of one of those Jordan Oliver double leg calls kind of thing, But he clearly proved he's an elite wrestler. So go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I think when you take that year off, hey, man, you beat Sasso in the finals in 2021, and then you kind of have some injuries that happen for 2022, and you come back. I mean, there's going to be a little bit of doubt because it's out of sight, out of mind, right? So I think, as far as the top storylines from, this tournament, I think for sure the O'Connor, being a two-time champ and also doing that for UNC. UNC's had a guy in the finals every year for the past, it's three consecutive tournaments.
At least.
O'Connor and Keyshawn Clark, and now O'Connor again.
Yeah.
So, but I think some of the other things is Penn State does it again by pulling a kid's red shirt midway through the season during the Iowa duel and ends up being in the national finals, beats Andonian on one of the craziest matches I've seen in the quarters in a long time. That match was pure craziness. And once again, to Mark's point, some of that review stuff or taking a lot of time in that match, kind of changed the outlook of that match. But, for a national champion to do a two-time run, even if it was 1 year apart or whatever, we talked about how tough this tournament is, and to be a two-time king, there's a lot of mad respect for O'Connor. And once again, he just knows how to wrestle. He just flat out knows how to win matches. He's really good at the basics, high-level basics. And it's not necessarily throws and, Granby rolls and all that kind of stuff, but his counterattacks in that match, he was go get another one. So he went and got 2 or 3 takedowns right off of those counters. Just a lot of good wrestling technique on display in that national finals.
Yeah, for sure. Marco?
Yeah, Austin. Austin's got to be 22, 23.
No, he wrestled in the 2017 Border Brawl. I'm assuming he was 18 then. So if you had 6 years, he's 24.
Okay, 24 against an 18-year-old Haynes from Penn State. Because I don't think he's 19 till closer on to the end of this year. It was just a man wrestling a boy. And that's what it was. And Haynes, as talented as he is, and he is very talented. And you're going to see him in the finals again. There's no doubt in my mind. Probably at 174. I think he'll probably end up moving up in the next year or so.
He's going to move up 2 weights?
I think he'll probably move up 1 to 2 weights. He's a good-sized kid. He's got room to put weight on. So I'm not sure. Probably 65 next year, David, is what I'm guessing. But I don't know what Penn State's going to do because they can pretty much do whatever they want. They're Penn State, so give them credit. But I think it was just an age thing. O'Connor's been in the finals before. He just wrestled really smart, did what he had to do. The match was not that close. you didn't kind of wonder who was going to win. I thought Austin just kind of controlled the whole situation out there. He kept it in his favor the whole time and didn't have to do anything special to win a national title, but it's great for North Carolina. I thought they had one of the better tournaments of any of the teams there. Though they didn't score a ton of points, their guys wrestled really hard, and you got to give them credit there. Them and Air Force.
They wrestled above their seeds. Clay Lout was also out for them, so that's another thing. Yep. I know you're not saying this, but I want to make sure people don't take this. We're not saying Austin O'Connor won just because he's older than Levi Haynes or something. Like, he's a really good wrestler that wrestled really well. There also David Taylor, and I'm sure you saw this, GT, because you're on social like more than Mark has, posted that like Levi Haynes just stopped by the room on Sunday, when they flew back and saw cars outside and just came in, put his shoes on, and started working out with little kids. So very cool story there. We're almost out of time and we're at the halfway point. So I think it's a good stopping point. But what I am going to say is I want to thank everybody that helped us put the live auction contest together. Mark emceed it, let me jump in and do a match or two, or a round or two, weight or two. I want to thank Nike, want to thank Pure and Clean, want to thank Spartan, want to thank Adidas on that. And then Border Brawl, big success. I want to thank Nike again. I want to thank Joel Kester and the Sports Commission for helping us a ton with venue. And then all the kids that wrestled, all the sponsors, especially the military. And then special shout out to Kelly Heineker, Jason Keck, Stephanie Miller, Stephanie Rotterman. They really pulled together in the last 10 days. I was ahead on some things and really behind on some things. And they basically pulled it out where nobody would know I was behind. I mean, even like Joel, like there was people said you should get a banner, and it was just something that had slipped through the crack. It was on my agenda and I missed it. I called Joel. He goes, send us the artwork. We sent the artwork at 10 o'clock and picked it up at 3. That's unheard of. And he goes, it's close to, it was 4 blocks. I walked. GT pulled some Houdini mailing situation. So to make that happen, people back in St. Louis helped me with that tremendously. Loved ones that stopped what they were doing the day. I mean, long story short, stuff was in Sri Lanka, was supposed to be in St. Louis on Wednesday and got to Tulsa on Tuesday. So, and the kids absolutely love the uniforms, GT, and you continue to outdo yourself. Can't thank you and Shane and Eddie enough for, frankly, just believing in a vision that I have had and try to continue to promote. And I will say this, knowing that we never coached any of these kids, but kids that were involved in Border Brawl scored 134 points at the national tournament this year. So we are having elite athletes move through, and that doesn't even get to count the young ladies that have wrestled in this event, because they're not allowed to score in this tournament. And we see a bunch of them scoring points, at the women's nationals and the U.S. Open and all that kind of stuff. So, and Mark, you're super helpful with us getting the auction event put on. So I want to thank everybody involved with those 2 events for making it happen. And I want to thank Gary Abbott. I think I let him down just by being sick, but the kindness, he's my boss, but he treated me like a person and not like an employee. And you never really know where you stand with people until stuff gets stressful. I think we all know that, right? We've all had stressful conversations with each other. And then you find out if you're an asset, a liability, or a friend. And Gary was my friend. And I was probably the worst I've felt since I had COVID in 2021. And I mean, like, it was bad. And he's, just the private text messages and how he spoke to me, not even so much what he said, but the tone and just the genuine care as a human being, I'll remember for a long time. So Gary, I just want to thank you publicly for that. I want to thank you guys for all the help you gave us too. So now that I finished writing my Hallmark card for the day, we'll be back next week with our reflections on 165 to 285. We'll also talk about who's in the portal, who's already moving, probably talk about who's coming back next year. And then that'll get us into April. And GT, the U.S. Open is not that far away. And just so people know, so they could start gearing up for that. There's no world team trials this year. There's no intermediate step. I don't think there's a last chance this year. I think they got rid of a lot of steps. So basically, without getting into too much detail, if you're not already in Final X, you got to get to the U.S. Open. Is that a fair statement?
Yep.
So it's going to be just nails. And is it fair to say, like, if you're in Final X, your opponent wins the U.S. Open? If there is nobody sitting in Final X, so for example, if you were our world team member but didn't medal, you'll be the #1 seed, and they wrestle the whole tournament until the finals, and then the finals become Final X. Do I have that correct?
I believe that at the weight classes that don't have a medalist, you'll be the #1 seed, or whatever it is. Your seeding criteria will be the #1 at the U.S. Open. Whoever then wins the U.S. Open then goes directly to Final X. And then there's there's not very many weight classes that don't have medals. So that will then happen in Colorado Springs. And it's a small tournament that then determines the last, basically all of Greco, and then a few weight classes within men's and women's, because we have a lot of medals that came back from Serbia. So it's only going to be maybe like 10 to 15 weights out of the 30. So it's going to be a lot smaller tournament, a lot smaller thing. But then you determine that little mini tournament in order to make the last participant for Final X. But the U.S. Open is determining everything for those weight classes that already have medalists. So you have to go to that tournament in order to make Final X for, let's say, David Taylor's weight, Kyle Snyder's weight. You have to go win the U.S. Open in order to be a part of that in, I believe it's Newark.
It is in Newark. It is June 10th. It is one tournament, one day, not two tournaments, two different locations. Okay, so I think that's also something that makes sense for USA Wrestling and for Flow. It'll be a full day of viewing. You know, a lot of those don't go 2 out of 3 anyway. If Grant beats me the first one, it's more than likely he's probably going to beat me the second one. And if not, the third one's always epic, you know, like the Seth Gross Dayton Fix thing. So lots of things to look out for there, and it'll be interesting to see which of these guys jump over from the college season into this. And the other thing that we cannot stress enough, if you're a 2023 world medalist, you're sitting in Final X for the Olympic team in 24. So I'm probably the biggest nerd about getting way out in front of this. But like, for example, Jaden is going to try to make the team at 97 and knock Snyder out, rather than go try to make the team at 92 and medal and be in the Olympic trial semifinals, which is what Dake essentially did in 2020, okay, which was 21, where he made the semis as a 79-kilo guy. So we'll get more into that. You can tell it's something I'm really excited about. I love going to the U.S. Open. It's a super cool, again, like, the wrestling's insane, and you can actually watch matches, and the tickets aren't that expensive. And, you know, travel might be more expensive than where you live from, but there's an abundance of hotels. Las Vegas is, if you don't know, Las Vegas is somewhat of a tourist town. So they have a lot of hotels there. So a few more hotels than Tulsa, if people are curious. So, all right. For Mark, I'm Grant, I'm David. Thank you guys for watching and listening. See y'all next week.